Ladies and gentlemen, there's something deeply painful about watching someone fall out of love with you. Not suddenly, but gradually, silently, like sand slipping through your fingers. You don't realize it at first. You just feel something shift. A quiet disconnection, an invisible wall that wasn't there before. And the truth is, when someone no longer loves you, they don't always say it out loud. Instead, they start doing three things. And it hurts, not because they stopped loving you, but because they stopped trying. There's a quiet shift that happens when someone begins to fall out of love. Not all at once, not with fireworks or slammed doors, but like a dimmer switch slowly turning down the light. One of the first signs is that they stop truly seeing you. Not just visually, but emotionally, spiritually, and relationally. When love is present, people don't just notice your face, they notice your expressions, your tone, your silence. They sense when you're off. They ask about your day and genuinely care about the answer. They remember the little things, how you take your tea, the way your voice softens when you talk about your dreams, the way you light up when something excites you. When love begins to fade, these moments of deep seeing begin to disappear. At first, you may not notice. They still smile, still say, "Good morning," still eat dinner next to you. But slowly, the richness of connection starts to erode. Their eyes drift past you instead of toward you. Conversations become surface level. You can be speaking your heart, and they'll nod without really hearing you. It's like you're a painting they used to admire every day, but now it's just a part of the wall. The details blur. The uniqueness they once cherished now fades into something ordinary, even invisible. And in that invisibility, you begin to feel like a ghost in your own relationship. It's important to understand that seeing someone clearly in a relationship means seeing them in their fullness, strengths and struggles, beauty and flaws. When someone loves you, they accept the complexity of your humanity. They make space for your growth and your fears. But when that love begins to fade, their perception of you becomes distorted. They might start to see you through a lens of irritation or indifference. Where they once saw your sensitivity as compassion, they now label it as weakness. What was once quirky is now annoying. The way they interpret your presence becomes less about truth and more about distance. This seeing isn't always intentional. It often comes from emotional detachment. When people feel disconnected, they stop wanting to understand. They lose curiosity. And where curiosity ends, assumptions begin. They stop asking, "What's going on with you today?" and instead assume you're being dramatic, moody, or unreasonable. And because they no longer see you, they no longer validate you. That lack of validation is profoundly painful. It leaves you feeling not just unseen, but unreal, as though your experiences don't count, as though you're being erased piece by piece from the narrative of the relationship. And here's the hardest part. And when someone stops seeing you clearly, you begin to question your own reflection. You start wondering, have I changed? Am I too much now? Not enough? You might find yourself over-explaining, over-giving, or over-functioning just to be noticed again. But that only deepens the pain, because it's not about what you're doing, it's about what they've stopped doing. Love is reciprocal. It's not your job to force someone to see your worth. When they choose not to look, it doesn't mean you're not valuable. It means they've closed their emotional eyes. The truth is, love needs attention. It needs someone to look at you with intention, to notice when you're hurting, to appreciate when you're thriving, to celebrate your weirdness, to sit with your fears. When someone stops doing that, the relationship becomes a shell. You can still go through the motions, but the soul of the connection is absent. And it's devastating because the pain isn't from rejection, it's from neglect. It's from the slow erasure of who you are in the eyes of someone who once claimed to love you. And no matter how strong you are, being unseen by someone who once saw everything in you will shake the foundation of your self-worth. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being in the same room as someone who's no longer emotionally available. It's not about distance in miles, it's about distance in hearts. When someone begins to fall out of love, they don't always leave right away. In fact, many stay. They share the same space, the same bed, the same routine. But the emotional presence, the warmth, the attentiveness, the feeling of being chosen every day starts to vanish. What remains is a shell of the relationship, a performance without the heart behind it. And you feel it. You feel it in the silences, in the cold glances, in the absence of effort. At first, this emotional withdrawal is subtle. They might not laugh as freely at your jokes. They don't check in with you after a hard day like they used to. They stop asking how you slept, what you're worried about, or what made you smile today. There's no more curiosity, no more tenderness. Conversations become transactional, about bills, chores, or schedules, but the intimacy has evaporated. You start to wonder if you're imagining things. You tell yourself they're just stressed or tired or distracted. But deep down, you know something is missing, and it's not something small. The hardest part about emotional withdrawal is that it's hard to prove. You can't point to an empty chair or a packed suitcase. They're there, they're just not with you. And that kind of abandonment is brutal because it creates cognitive dissonance. Your mind says, they're still here, but your heart whispers, they've already gone. You keep trying to reconnect. You initiate conversations, ask deeper questions, try to hold their hand. But it's like hugging a shadow. They might smile politely, nod along, or even go through the motions, but the spark of reciprocity is gone. This disconnect creates a deep imbalance in the relationship. You begin carrying the weight of emotional labor alone. You become the one who plans the date nights, who notices when things feel off, who reaches out to repair every minor conflict. You start trying harder, not because you're needy, but because you're trying to hold together something that was once sacred. But the truth is, love can't survive on one person's effort. Emotional intimacy can't be forced or faked. It needs two open hearts, two people willing to stay engaged, not just present. And that's the tragic paradox. They stay, but they don't stay with you. You go to bed next to them, but it feels like you're sleeping beside a stranger. You share meals, but not stories. You share a home, but not connection. You might find yourself wondering what changed. Was it something you said? Did you miss a sign? But this withdrawal isn't always about you. Sometimes people begin to emotionally detach because they don't want to confront their fading feelings. So they quietly exit the relationship emotionally while keeping up appearances. It's avoidance dressed as routine. What's most damaging about this emotional absence is that it starves the relationship of its oxygen, vulnerability. When someone is emotionally unavailable, they stop being honest, open, and expressive. Vulnerability disappears. And without vulnerability, there's no real love. There's only performance. This is why emotional withdrawal feels so suffocating. You're giving your whole self to someone who's only offering a fragment of theirs. And that realization doesn't just break your heart, It breaks your sense of emotional safety, because nothing hurts more than loving someone who's already emotionally left the room. When someone begins to emotionally detach from a relationship, they rarely admit it outright, not to you, and often not even to themselves. Instead, they start justifying their emotional absence with logic. I'm just overwhelmed at work. I'm tired lately. You know how busy life is? These statements might be true on the surface, but underneath them is a more painful truth. They are creating distance, and they need a reason for it. Emotional disconnection isn't always loud. It's often hidden behind reasonable explanations. But logic doesn't soothe the heart that feels neglected. It only confuses it. At first, the excuses seem valid. We all go through stress. We all get exhausted. We all retreat sometimes to recover. So you give them space. You tell yourself you're being understanding, patient, supportive. You think, this is just a season. They'll come back. But over time, you begin to notice that the space isn't shrinking. It's growing. The explanations keep coming, but the effort doesn't. They don't reach for you emotionally. They don't initiate connection. Their reasons for pulling away multiply, but the love that once anchored you starts to drift. This is when the logic starts to feel like a wall. A well-defended, airtight wall built to keep vulnerability out. The relationship becomes one-sided. You're trying to get through to someone who insists everything is fine. They might say things like, I just need some time, or you're overthinking it. These phrases shut down conversation instead of opening it up. And over time, you begin to doubt your own emotional reality. You wonder if you're too sensitive, too needy, too insecure. But you're not. You're just responding to a change they're not willing to name. People justify distance with logic because admitting the emotional truth is uncomfortable. Saying, I feel disconnected from you, or I'm not sure I love you like I used to, is terrifying, both for the person saying it and the one hearing it. So they take the safer route. They explain the disconnection in terms of stress, timing, or external pressures. But emotional absence is not about logistics. It's about the silent choices people make to stop showing up. Day after day, conversation after conversation, moment after moment. And logic cannot replace emotional presence. This justification can also serve as a way for them to avoid responsibility. If their detachment is framed as circumstantial, then they don't have to face the consequences of their emotional exit. It lets them off the hook. They might even believe their own reasoning. But for the person on the receiving end, for you, it feels like emotional gaslighting. You feel the coldness, the space, the silence, but they keep telling you there's nothing wrong. That mismatch between your lived experience and their narrative leaves you feeling unheard and invalidated. Eventually, logic becomes a smokescreen that hides the real issue. Their heart is no longer in the same place. And while it's tempting to keep believing the explanations, deep down, you feel the loss. Not because they said it, but because they stopped saying anything meaningful at all. The love is no longer active. And no excuse, no reason, no schedule or stressor can truly account for what you feel slipping away. Because love, real love, doesn't vanish when things get hard. It leans in. And when it doesn't, you must be brave enough to acknowledge that no amount of logic can fill the space where intimacy used to live. When love begins to fade, it doesn't always look like silence or distance at first. Sometimes it shows up as irritation, sharp, unexplainable, and misdirected. Things that used to make them smile now make them sigh. The way you hum while cooking, the questions you ask, The small rituals you've always done together, suddenly they're sources of annoyance. You start to notice the shift not because they say something is wrong, but because everything you do seems to bother them. It's like walking through a minefield made of tiny, everyday moments. This change is subtle at first. A small eye roll here, a passive-aggressive comment there, a sharp tone that didn't used to be there. You chalk it up to stress or a bad day or something else external. But over time, it becomes clear this isn't about those small things. It's about something unspoken. Their patience thins. Their tolerance for your presence wears down. They seem agitated by your very being, and that's a deep emotional wound to carry because it makes you question if the love they once gave you was real, or worse, if you've done something wrong. But this irritation isn't really about you. It's about their internal shift, the way their heart has moved without permission or discussion. When someone no longer feels connected emotionally, they often become resentful of the intimacy they once invited. They start seeing you not as a partner, but as a mirror reflecting their emotional discomfort. Every word you speak reminds them of the closeness they no longer want to maintain. Every moment you try to connect feels like pressure to a person already leaning away. And so they snap not because you've changed, but because their feelings have. People often use irritation as a form of emotional distancing. Instead of saying, "I feel distant from you," they pick fights over trivial things. They argue about dishes, about timing, about habits. They create conflict to avoid connection. Why? Because connection would require honesty, and honesty would mean confronting the discomfort of their fading love. It's easier to say you're annoyed than to admit your heart is no longer fully in the relationship. So they deflect, redirect, criticize, all while leaving you wondering what you're doing wrong. You start shrinking yourself. You try to be more careful, more quiet, less you. You apologize more. You try not to upset them. You become hyper aware of their moods and start tiptoeing around their emotions. This constant tension is exhausting. It chips away at your confidence, your self-worth, your sense of belonging. And yet you stay because you remember who they used to be. You remember how things used to feel. You hope the irritation is temporary, but the truth is it's often a symptom of something deeper, unresolved disconnection masked as frustration. When someone truly loves you, they have grace for your imperfections. They laugh at your quirks, not mock them. They see your habits as parts of you, not flaws to be fixed. But when that love begins to fade, every minor thing becomes a reason to pull away. And while you may not be able to change their growing resentment, you can recognize it for what it is. It's not about how loudly you chew or how many times you've asked a question. It's about a heart that's no longer in rhythm with yours. And though that realization is painful, it's also freeing. Because once you stop blaming yourself, you can stop fighting for a connection that only one of you is still showing up for. When someone no longer loves you, they often feel the need to justify why, not to you, but to themselves. And instead of owning their emotional shift, instead of saying something in me has changed, they begin rewriting the story, slowly, silently, and sometimes even convincingly. They turn the narrative so that you become the problem. The same qualities they once adored in you are now framed as flaws. Your need for connection becomes too needy. Your sensitivity turns into emotional instability. The intimacy you shared becomes evidence of your weakness, not your vulnerability. This rewriting doesn't always come with a confrontation. Often, it creeps in quietly, like a fog. You start hearing things like, "You've changed," Or you're always so emotional. It's confusing because you haven't changed. You've been showing up with the same love, the same heart, the same effort. But now they view you through a different lens, a colder one. They no longer want to see your side. They want to justify pulling away. And to do that, they need to make their distance feel reasonable. So they distort the truth, not necessarily with lies, but with interpretations that serve their emotional escape. And here's what's most painful: it works. You start internalizing the version of you they're reflecting back. You begin questioning yourself. Maybe I am too much. Maybe I do overreact. Maybe I've been selfish or cold or unreasonable. But what's actually happening is projection. They are projecting their discomfort, guilt, or fear onto you so they don't have to own the weight of what's really happening. They're falling out of love and don't have the courage to admit it openly. So instead, they convince themselves and maybe even others that it's your fault the relationship is strained. This rewriting also serves a protective function for them. If they can make you the reason for the breakdown, they can walk away feeling justified, even righteous. It becomes easier to leave when they believe they're escaping dysfunction. It becomes easier to emotionally check out when they've convinced themselves you're toxic, dramatic, or ungrateful. They don't do this because they're malicious. They do it because the alternative is much harder. Facing their own failure to keep showing up, to keep loving, to keep choosing the relationship with intention and care. And what's heartbreaking is how isolating this experience becomes. You try to explain, to defend yourself, to clarify your intentions, but nothing lands. You feel like you're arguing against a version of yourself that doesn't even exist, yet somehow that version is being held up like a mirror. You're no longer being seen as you are. You're being seen as who they need you to be in order to make their departure easier. That misrepresentation cuts deep because love once meant being truly known. And now it means being misunderstood on purpose. But the truth is, their story isn't your identity. You don't need to carry the burden of their discomfort or the blame for their disconnection. People who truly love, you don't distort your character to soothe their own guilt. They face hard truths with courage. They admit when they're fading. They take responsibility for their part. When someone rewrites the story to make you the villain, it says far more about their emotional honesty than your worth. You are still whole, still lovable, still enough. Even if they can no longer see you clearly, your truth remains intact. There's a moment in every unraveling relationship when you realize that you're the only one still fighting for it. It doesn't hit like thunder. It settles in slowly, like a cold breeze through a window you didn't know was open. You begin to feel alone, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. You're sharing space, a home, maybe even a bed, but the connection is gone. You feel unseen, unheard, untouched in the ways that matter most. And you start carrying the relationship on your back, believing if you just try a little harder, love will come back. But no matter how hard you try, something always feels missing. Conversations are dry. Their responses are short. There's no follow-up, no curiosity. You find yourself doing all the reaching out, all the initiating, texts, plans, emotional check-ins, and they respond sure, but only just enough to keep the illusion of partnership. You start to feel like a placeholder in someone else's life, someone they used to love, but no longer truly see. And what makes this feeling even more painful is that you're still showing up fully. You still care. You still hope. You're still there, just increasingly alone in the why. Aloneness in a relationship is a kind of grief. You grieve the intimacy you used to share, the spontaneous laughter, the thoughtful gestures, the way you used to feel held, chosen, prioritized. Now, you sit beside them and feel like a stranger. You speak and feel like you're echoing into a void. You cry and they don't ask why. You celebrate a win and they barely look up. It's not that they're gone. It's that they've emotionally checked out. And the silence between you becomes the loudest truth in the room. What's especially confusing is that everything on the surface still looks intact. You still go out together. You still attend family events. You still smile in photos. But the emotional intimacy is gone, and that's what real relationships are built on. Without it, you feel like an actor in a play you never auditioned for. You pretend everything is fine, but your heart knows better. And what's worse, you feel like you can't even talk about it, because every time you bring it up, you're met with defensiveness, silence, or vague reassurances. Nothing changes. Nothing softens. Eventually, the emotional labor becomes unbearable. You become exhausted from constantly trying to reignite something that only you seem to miss. You begin to wonder if this is what love is supposed to feel like: one-sided, draining, lonely. You feel the ache of being with someone who no longer chooses you, not openly, not daily. And perhaps most devastating of all, you realize you've lost yourself while trying to hold on to them. You've made yourself smaller to keep the peace. You've turned down your own volume so they wouldn't pull further away. But love, real love, requires presence. Not just physical proximity, but emotional availability, mutual effort, shared vulnerability. When those things are missing, you're not in a relationship, you're in a performance. And the moment you realize you're more alone with them than you ever were without them is the moment your heart begins to tell the truth your mind has been trying to avoid, that it may be time to stop reaching for someone who's already let go, and that you deserve more than simply not being left. You deserve to be chosen. When someone no longer loves you, they rarely say it outright. Instead, they withdraw, shift, distort, and disappear one emotional thread at a time. But no matter how quietly love leaves, its absence is deafening. And while it's natural to want to hold on, to prove your worth, to fight for what once was, there comes a time when you must choose yourself. Love is not meant to be begged for, defended, or earned. It's meant to be mutual, present, and real. If you find yourself carrying a relationship alone, ask yourself this: what would it feel like to be in a love where you don't have to chase it to feel it? That's the love you deserve, always.